Going beyond the headlines. Asking the questions you want answered. Exploring government policies and how they impact you. We are delving deeper.
Good evening and welcome to Delving Deeper. I am Sunulala filling in for Ayana Carter. Joining us this evening is no stranger to the media, no stranger to Delving Deeper. It's Dr. the Honorable Nyan Gadsby-Dolly, the Minister of Education. Minister, good evening and welcome to the show.
Good evening. Thank you. Nice to be here.
So, of course, the Ministry of Education would have received the highest budgetary allocation again in the recent Finance Ministry's presentation of the budget. Could you elaborate on how this is going to be spent in the upcoming fiscal year?
This country has typically, for quite a few years, allocated between 9 and 10% of the budget to education. And it's just a measure of the prioritization of education in Trinidad and Tobago, traditionally. So that 6.3 billion, 6.4 is broken down into broad areas. So 2.5 billion pays our teachers. We have about 13,000 to 14,000 teachers. 2.5 billion is allocated there. Another 1.5 billion goes to our tertiary institutions. So that's UE, UTT, COSTAT, MIC, YTEP, NESC. So 1.5 billion there. Then another billion is spent on social intervention measures. So GATE, HELP, school feeding, school transport. That's another billion. Then we look at what is directly allocated to schools, government grants, as well as the money used for school infrastructure. That's about 0.6 billion. And then the last, about 0.8 billion or so, is used to deal with recurrent salaries for the Ministry of Education staff and other recurrent expenditure for the ministry. So that's a general idea of how it's broken down. That's 6.3 billion.
In terms of recurrent expenditure for staff and so on, has that risen over the years or it's almost basically stable?
It's basically stable. I mean, it would have risen in small amounts depending on what the ministry did. So, for example, we have recently introduced the Educational Technology Unit. So, of course, you would have, that's new positions, so you would have money allocated there. We've also recently instituted new school social workers and guidance counselors as a part of our remediation program. So again, that's new salaries there in terms of recurrent. So it varies from time to time, but not in any significant way.
I know you would have recently talked about teachers in terms of how many teachers are in the system and how many we need to recruit. Do we have enough teachers in the system?
We do have vacancies. Many of them in the technical areas at secondary level. So where we have applicants, there's a glut of applicants for some of the regular subjects, math and English, and so there's a glut there. But we do have vacancies in the technical areas, and that's one part of our TVET revitalization, really attracting and keeping persons to do the plumbing, the electrical, and so on that we want to focus on in our schools.
That's a technical vocational areas. And
yes.
How soon are we looking to recruit these teachers?
Well, it's an active thing. So we do have recruitment going on now, but we want to partner more formally with the technical institutions, so the MIC, COSTAT, and so on, to see how we can have a recruitment stream coming from them. But we recruit on a regular basis. Right now, recruitment is going, as a matter of fact, for those persons.
How is the collaboration, as we talk about technical vocational studies and so on, how is the collaboration with MIC and these institutions with the Ministry of Education?
We work very closely together. I think that's an important part of it. And what we want to do is to bring them more closely into our secondary schools, to partner them with some of our secondary schools. So as a part of our remedial education program, we have this initiative called Tastes of TVET, and that went on for the last academic year, and we want to reintroduce it again in this year, where the institutions go into the schools and they present their offerings. So it's a way to show our students who are technically minded the career path. So they know that they're coming from secondary school, they're doing certain subjects, and they can continue their education at a higher level at the post-secondary institutions. It's a big part of what we have worked on with the National Training Agency, which is the qualifications framework for Trinidad and Tobago. That has been cabinet approved. We did that in the last academic year. And the importance of that is that it equates the technical level of training with the academic. so that it takes away the ambiguity. Somebody does a technical diploma, they want to know what kind of level that is in terms of academic. It equates those things. So the next step would be to formalize and publicize this and to allow our secondary school students who are doing the technical stream to see clearly their path of study, just as someone who doing the academic stream would know that they're going to do CSEC, they're going to do CAPE, they're going to go to university. We want that to be very clear to our students who are in the technical area, because that's a part of our technical revitalization. We want to really promote that in our school. So that's what we're about now.
I just want to go back to the budget allocation to the Ministry of Education. Minister of Finance, Carmen Bird, would have announced a $1,000 grant for needy students and pupils to purchase textbooks and other school supplies. I understand it's going to help about 63,000 students or pupils. How is the process to select or identify these beneficiaries of this $1,000 grant?
We're going to be working with the Ministry of Social Development on this and to identify clearly who we target. Now, you would know that the ministry also distributes devices, laptops, via Means-Test. That's run by the Ministry of Education. In this book grant device, we would want a closer collaboration with the Ministry of Social Development so that the families that are identified in their database already as those who require assistance from the government, these are the ones you want to target first. So we will be liaising with them to be able to implement that initiative.
How soon can we see this being rolled out? It's in the fiscal year, but can we see that happening in the first quarter of 2024?
Well, the book grant would be applied for the next academic year. So we'll be looking to give that to students and parents for the next year.
A big issue is the standardization of textbooks, which would allow students to reuse textbooks year after year. Can you say how soon these consultation talks would begin with these stakeholders?
Well, actually, the ministry would have issued in September of 2022 a freeze on changing of textbooks. So for this academic year, there was no change in the textbooks exactly because of that reason, because you recognize that there was, what was developing was a system where little changes were being made, textbooks could not be used from year to year, and that really induced some hardship on our parents. So since last year, we would have dealt with that so that the textbooks should not have changed for this year. What we are developing within the ministry is a textbook policy, because that has not been in existence. So what has been happening in many cases is that principals would be approached by booksellers who had books that they felt would be advantageous to students, and they would put them on the book list. So there is now need for regulation of how books get onto the book list, for an approved list of books and so on. So that policy is being worked on now by the ministry. And once it is in draft form, we will now then invite the stakeholders to take a look at it, give us their comments, their recommendations, so that we can move forward in that way. But in the meantime, we have already frozen the book list.
Of course, there are amendments that need to be made in some subjects because we always see differences in, let's say, something changes in geography, for instance. Amendments would need to be made for the following year. But how do we see this going forward? Is there a process in terms of the school? Who has the last say in terms of the book list? Is it the school? Is it the Ministry of Education?
At this point, the school. So that's why that policy is so important, so that we map out where the authority lies to put a book on a book list or change a book. Because I'm sure you've seen on social media, Facebook, people showing books with errors and so on. How do these books make it onto the book list? The last say at this point lies to the principal in putting a book on. But we need to revise that. There needs to be regulation, and that's the policy we are working on now.
Is there a need to possibly regularize this in terms of, let's say a school chooses a book list to submit to the ministry and so on? Does that happen?
And that's exactly what the policy has to lay out. It does not happen at this time, but it needs to happen. And so the policy needs to be very clear as to who has the authority to put a book onto a list, where the ministry comes in, where the school comes in, and how we proceed. So that's what the policy is going to lay out.
We continue to see students moving around with these heavy book bags. Are we at an advanced stage with the e-learning platform?
So we have entered into an agreement with iGovTT, out of the Ministry of Digital Transformation, to look at ebooks. So a RFP was sent out. We received applications, and so we have been looking at it with iGovTT, and we're at the point now, it's been rather complex because this is a relatively new area for Trinidad and Tobago. In some of the countries of the region, they have implemented ebooks to some extent. So we've been looking at it, and so we are at the point now where we are ready to go to Cabinet with the award of ebooks. That's where we want to go. It will be on a pilot stage, but that's where we want to go. And when we implement that, we see what happens with the pilot and so on, we will be better informed to roll this out in a more streamlined fashion. But certainly, that is the direction that we are heading into.
You've always been an advocate for physical classes. Even during the COVID pandemic, I know when you told us there were underperforming students, and one of the reasons was that because there were virtual classes. And I experienced it myself. Doing a virtual class is not the same as the physical class and so on. In terms of, we've had a full year of physical classes. Have we seen an improvement in students, and how is that going?
We certainly have seen a great improvement in our students when we look at the SEA results and when we look at the CXC results, both CSEC, which is Form 5 level, and KEEP. And we are very grateful and thankful that our students have been able to achieve our pre-COVID levels of work, right, and of results. So while we're happy to see that, though, that is not to say that we are at the level we would want to be. We certainly want to be higher than that. For example, in CSEC, students getting more than 50%, that's in the 50s. We want to see that in 70s. So those are our goals. But certainly, if we compare it to what happened last year, we see a huge improvement, and we are grateful for that. And we know that at the level of the ministry, we have done things, initiatives, through the remedial education program that would have contributed to that. But we cannot escape the fact that one of the largest contributors would be simply that our children are in school, where they can interact with each other, with the teachers, and we have seen that improvement. So we're very grateful for that.
Of course, there's always room for improvement, and I've heard that saying, my teachers telling me that all the time. But in terms of subject areas, is there any subject areas we can improve, in particular math or English?
There are many that need improvement. None is at 100%. We have some subjects in the high 90s and so, but math and English are the fundamental subjects. And our pass rates, they are over 50 in those subjects, yes, but we need to pay particular focus on math and English. They are the foundation for all the other subjects. And that's why we have pulled out 106 schools. We call them our schools of focus, where we are adding more resources, we are paying more attention, we are monitoring more closely. And in those schools, we have trained our standard 3 to 5 teachers, because it's 80 primary schools, and in the 26 secondary schools, we have trained our Form 1 teachers in remedial math, writing, and English. So those teachers can better address the needs of the students who are before them, because we want to improve the pass rates in those subjects, because we know that once we do it there, it will have a ripple effect on all the other subjects.
I just want to go back to the TVET subjects. I know we have some TVET subjects in some of the subject areas at CSEC level. How is the performance going in that?
The performance at the practical subjects is typically quite good. Our issue, though, is that over the years, some of the labs have fallen into disrepair. And this has resulted in the schools not being able to offer the range of subjects. In addition to that, we have the problem of the instructors, where some of those practical persons, they're entrepreneurs, they don't necessarily want to be teachers. So we have to now really attract teachers, more teachers into these areas. So that really is a challenge. Where students are able to do the subjects, they typically are very engaged because they're practical subjects and the students enjoy doing them. So the levels are typically high once the students are doing the subjects. Our issue comes with the offering, the range of offerings, and ensuring that there are teachers to be able to, address all of our students.
In discipline in schools, we continue to see these social media videos, and I'm not sure if we're seeing it now that it's more prevalent. I'm not sure if it was going on before, but we continue to see indiscipline in schools, and which begs the question, what are some of the stages in addressing some of these indiscipline in schools, and what is being done to reduce these incidents at schools?
Well, I can assure you that they were happening before. However, with social media, everything is more present to us and we see it happening, and it really comes home to us that this is taking place in our schools. So what has been happening to address that? Again, those 26 secondary schools of focus, some of those schools are the ones where we have the highest level of indiscipline. And trust me, what you see on social media is just a tip of the iceberg in terms of the infractions that happen at the school. So what we have done with those 26 schools, we have introduced a learning support assistants. Those persons, some schools have 2 or 3. Those persons are assigned to the school, and the principal can task them in any way to assist in school operations. Why this is critical is because a lot of things happen outside of supervised time in schools. So if a teacher is not present, a class must be supervised. These persons can add to that, and they can help in the operations of the school. We have also met with MTS and spoken to our school safety officers in terms of patrols. I don't know if you've ever been in one of these secondary schools, or government secondary schools. Some of them are very large. And there are areas that sometimes are, some people call them Siberia. They call them different things because they may be to the back of the compound. They may get less supervision there. And so, of course, there's a lot of space for things to happen there that are nefarious. So, increasing patrols. The other thing we have done is assign school social workers and guidance counselors in a dedicated form to these schools. In the normal mode of operation, 2 or 3 schools might be assigned 1 school social worker who will handle the caseload among those schools. Not for our schools of focus. We have assigned dedicated persons because the caseload is a lot higher. When we see students acting out, sometimes when you hear the backstory, you understand that it's problems at home, in their communities, and so on. And it finds its way into the schools. So the caseload is higher, so we have dedicated that student support to those schools because it's important. We've also looked at the issue of principal leadership and offered training to our principals in those areas because it's important for them to be able to deal with the challenges ahead of them. The remedial training for the teachers, that's also part of it because sometimes what we see when the students act out, it's because they are disadvantaged in terms of their ability to do work. So they want to feel strong in other areas, and so they act out in these ways. They're disengaged in class and so on. So that's a part of it. Another part of it is offering TVET subjects, those practical areas at Form 1. So we've looked at a different type of curriculum, and so we are introducing that. It's been introduced, but we are working with schools to ensure that their labs are in order and so on, and so that they can offer TVET at a lower level, so that we can engage the students. And once they're engaged in school and they are doing what they have to do, then the incidence of indiscipline is less. Another thing that is important is the state of our schools. In some of these schools, they are the oldest schools in the country, meaning that the repair of their labs is critical so that we can offer the TVET subjects, meaning that we have to ensure that the school itself looks as though someone cares about it, so the students can have that feeling that they are in an institution that they can be proud of. And of course, we have to ensure that the teachers are well motivated. So a part of our digital transformation deals with ensuring that teacher issues are negated as much as possible. And we are working with the TSC to ensure we have appointed principals, appointed vice principals, appointed deans, heads of department, because that middle management forms a big part of the school discipline. So as you can see, it's a multi-pronged strategy dealing with not just the discipline itself, but also looking at how we can improve the school operation. As it comes to school discipline, there is a matrix that we have discussed with stakeholders that is in place. So when an incident happens, the teacher is to report that to the principal. The principal looks at the level of it, they look at the discipline history of the student, and they can now decide whether they're going to call in a parent to have a parent conference, or whether it's something they can deal with just in the school. If the student is a repeat offender, then parents must be called in. They must be referred to school social worker so that we can look at exactly what's happening with that child, offer the counseling to both child and parent. If it persists, then the student now comes and an incident takes place, they come now for extended suspension, where there's a time that they don't go to school and intense focus is paid on parent conference, counseling, etc. And if that student, despite all of the efforts, does not seem to be able to regulate their behavior, then we get to the point of an expulsion warning, where we say to the student, it's a letter that I signed myself after reviewing the file, and we say to the student, if you persist, we are going to have to deal with expulsion. And if the student goes beyond that, well, then it gets to the point of expulsion. However, if something is gross enough that the student shows that, this is beyond the level of trying to deal with it with the counseling and so on, then one incident can get a student directly to the expulsion stage.
Do we have figures in terms of how many students would have been suspended and actually got back into the system in terms of not being expelled?
Well, most students who are suspended and go through discipline matrix do not get expelled. In a typical year, students, no more than maybe 10 to 20 students would be expelled in a typical year. Of course, there are different things that may affect that, but that's a general level. And the suspension figure is much higher than that. You can have students in the thousands being suspended across an entire academic year. So most students, when they are suspended and when they are paid the attention of the student support services, they're able to regulate their behavior. Not be perfect necessarily, but they're able to regulate their behavior in such a way that allows them to continue in school.
I remember sitting at a post-cabinet news conference, it must have been about a year ago, and I remember you talking about indiscipline at schools, and you were urging parents to have a role, a positive role, be a positive role model for their children. Could you elaborate on this and tell us how is this going so far?
Well, parents, by and large, do what they are supposed to do in terms of encouraging their children, offering the kind of discipline to their children that is required. But there are some children, there are some parents who, don't seem to take that very seriously, or in some way, they are not able to do it. Parents are mentioned in the Education Act because it is clear that teachers certainly cannot do the education of our children alone. Education is preparation for life. When we educate, the point of education is to create the ideal citizen. There's no way a teacher alone can do that. A parent must be on board. And in every school and in every story of a successful student, most times there's a hard working parent behind the scenes making that effort. So in most cases, in the general case, parents are doing what is required. However, in the number of cases where parents are not, or where students are not responding to their parents' efforts, those are the cases that we have to focus on, because even though it's a small minority of our students misbehaving in this way, it's a loud response. And so we want to reduce that as much as possible with the support of the parents.
Have we seen an increase or decrease in the amount of indiscipline at schools, and what are some of the infractions that takes place?
We have seen a decrease in some incidents and an increase in some. For example, one of the trends we've seen is that in the schools of focus, where we had a lot more fighting going on in school, because of the measures we have put in, that has decreased. But what has increased is the fighting outside of the school. So they're now waiting till they get out into the streets. So you would notice a lot more things happening outside. What we have done in response to that, and even before that happened, we did ask the TTPS to increase their patrols outside of school and in city centers at the time when school is over, because we recognize that sometimes you have inter-school fighting, and sometimes you have fights that happen from the students in one school, but they wait till they get out there to do it, because in the school environment, we have really tightened what's happening there. So fighting is, of course, the most common infraction that you see. What you also see a lot is possession of vaping and smoking instruments. So vaping is very popular, and cigarettes, marijuana, very popular in the schools. You see a lot of that. So those would be the two major ones that you see. And of course, defiance of authority, what we'd call rudeness, sometimes at a low level, sometimes at a gross level. Those would be the three main contenders.
Melissa, you jumped the gun of my next question, because I was just about to ask about police patrols, but is this still going on at selected schools across the country?
It is. And also the interaction of the police. Even when there's not an incident, the community police are present. We ask them for 17 specific schools, and they are present, so they respond very readily if there's any issue at all, and the principals can call on them to, just come do a patrol, just to make sure that things are going well in the school. So yes, they're still working with us.
I remember El Dorado Secondary School was one of those schools that had a high incidence of indiscipline, and there was a school in Shoguanas as well. I think it was the Shoguanas government secondary school, I believe it was. But have we seen some of these schools getting back to a sense of normalcy in terms of not so many incidents of indiscipline?
Well, let me just say that normalcy is different for different schools. And these schools, some of them have a general trait of school indiscipline that goes back many years and has quite a few factors that affect it. So it's not, we don't really want to see them go back to normal. We want to see them improve in discipline. We want to see that decrease, and we want to see the productivity and the results of the school increase. So that multi-pronged approach we spoke about, dealing with the curriculum, dealing with the support to the school, dealing with the supervision, the patrols, dealing with the teaching, all of that is designed to improve the school effectiveness and to increase student success.
Minister, can you tell us about some of your successes of the ministry over the past financial year?
There have been quite a lot. It's been such an experience. One of the major things I believe that we feel very happy about at the ministry would be the increase in success of our students at the SCA, the CSEC, and the CAPE level coming out of the pandemic. We have achieved the pre-pandemic level, so we are glad that we have been able to institute measures and keep our schools safe so that our students have the benefit of being able to go to school. I think that's one of the crowning things, because education is meant to create ideal citizens. And where we are limited in that regard, that cuts to the core. So that remedial education program, I think, is one of the highlights of what we have been doing. Of course, we have been able to, again, procure devices and distribute them to students. We have been able to do these things, but it all comes down to being able to offer the type of education at our schools that is required, and also being able to address the schools that are deficient and give them the assistance. Another area is the cultural transformation. I think that's been a very important policy that we have passed and begun to implement, because it speaks to the core of what we are doing, who we are creating, this ideal citizen. And in doing that, we have been able to address some of the inequities in the system, and equity in quality education is one of our pillars. So being able to say to schools, you know what, you have to do certain activities so that all of our students get the chance to be able to participate in those things. I think that's one of the areas that at the ministry we feel very happy that we have been able to achieve. And we look forward to next academic year, where we'll be doing curricular changes to ensure that we focus on values, attitudes, and behaviors, and developing those in our children. So those are just two of the major things that we feel happy about at the ministry that we've been able to accomplish.
Of course, we have to balance out the conversation. So tell us about some of the, we've talked about the successes. Tell us about some of the challenges that you've experienced at the ministry.
I think one of the greatest challenges is with our digital transformation effort. That is much more than just trying to put devices into schools or put devices in the hands of our teachers and our staff at the ministry. It goes deeply into a mindset change and a change in the way we operate. So while we are instituting digital transformation, it's also looking at strategic changes in how our processes take place. And once you're speaking change, you're speaking about people changing, behaviors changing, persons being willing to accept new ways of doing things. And that in itself is a serious challenge. So we have been working with our students, our teachers, our parents, the staff at the ministry to be able to institute these changes. And yes, it has been challenging. It continues to be so. But we have also seen the little milestones being achieved along the way. And so we are very happy for those. That's one of the major challenges, changing behavior at the Ministry of Education and seeing the results of that. So I would quote that as the biggest challenge.
I know during the pandemic, we would have resorted to some virtual classes. I hope we don't get back to that stage anytime soon. But does the ministry have any plan in place in case we need to revert to that again?
Yes, and the best of both worlds would be physical classes with a digital component, so that even outside of the physical classroom, students have a virtual classroom that they exist in along with their teacher, so that learning transcends the physical classroom. And so we have been working on our student learning management system, called the SLMS, and it is for this reason that the ministry has begun our educational technology unit. That's a new unit that we've added to the ministry in the last 2 years, and their main goal and focus is to establish the ministry's school learning management system. There is one that existed prior to COVID. However, it needed to be optimized and organized in a certain way, and we needed to, most importantly, feed data into it. This data would be all of our student and teacher records. And that's what allows us to build the e-classrooms and add our students to it. So it is a huge undertaking for us. We are working 2 projects at the same time: the student management system and the school learning management system. The student management system is a system that takes all that data from all of our students in all of our different schools. So we're speaking of over 200,000 students in over 840 schools, taking that data from the principals, putting it into a database that we can use that data now to build the school learning management system. So those 2 projects are taking place concurrently, and that is where we are really focusing on building resilience into the system so that we have an organized system. What happened over the COVID was there was an emergency system. So every school, use a Google Classroom or whatever to get online. But we need, as a ministry, to have that type of data and system resident with us, because it means that all of the exams that are set on the students on any e-classroom, we would have access to that data. That data is important for us to be able to look at trends in our schools, to look at trends with our students. So building that system is a very complex, a mammoth project, but we are well on our way with it. So we have created maybe about 30% of the e-classrooms, and we are heading to the others. So that educational technology department is doing that. So that is where the emergency response that had to take place during COVID, we are working to eliminate that having to happen, because we will have set e-classrooms. So our tertiary institutions, they were able to move seamlessly into the virtual environment. We want that for primary, secondary, and ECCE classes as well. So that's what we're working on, so that if anything else, God forbid, there's no wood here for me to knock, but if anything else like COVID happens, we will have a set system where the transition will be seamless.
Your final thoughts?
Transformation of the education system. That's what we are trying to achieve at the Ministry of Education, with the goal of building the ideal Trinidad and Tobago citizen. Someone who's disciplined, tolerant, and productive, and will drive the development of Trinidad and Tobago forward. That's what we educate for. That's why we invest in education. So we are transforming the education system to better do this, to ensure that all of our students across the board have the chance to be able to be well educated, relevant, quality, accessible, equitable education for all. That's our goal, and we invite the entire country to come on board with us as we transform education in Trinidad and Tobago.
Minister, thanks very much for joining us on this week's episode of Delving Deeper. I know it's basically a drop in the bucket, but there's so much we can get in a half-an-hour segment.
Yes. Happy to be here and happy to speak with you on this.
Join us at the same time next week for another episode of Delving Deeper. I am Sonolala, and on behalf of the entire group, have a great night.